Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to the Happy Cynics. We're going to shift gears a little bit. So we thought we'd take a little kind of springboard off of a topic that came up in the last episode. We were talking about economics, thinking about the marketplace. And so one of the questions I had, and I think we were kind of talking about this, is to what extent does the marketplace generate quality? Because I think I'm not going to necessarily try to pull this back into politics, but I want to say I do not think that majority rule produces the best quality, and yet I think allowing just a handful of elite people to decide everything is kind of dangerous in its own way as well. So we want to kind of think about maybe using an example of music or the arts more broadly. So where would you like to start with this, Isaac?
Yeah, this came up not in the episode, but we were talking after we had finished recording and thought that this was an interesting question.
Yes.
So I would want to say that music or art in general should not be commodified. That's sort of my springboard into this. That art is part of the common good and therefore should be available to all universally.
Oh, okay. So so define. When you say commodified, all right, in what way are you thinking about that? Maybe I'm just confused.
As in a product that is available in the marketplace. So if you think about it, I like to think about it in terms of museums. So the city I grew up in, St. Louis,
right,
their museums are all free because the sort of idea behind that is that it's part of public education and therefore part of the common good. And so you don't have to pay to get into the museums. There's no profit seeking in the public museums in St. Louis. They're all publicly funded and available to anybody.
So, okay. And I don't want to make this, this is kind of flipping around here today. Maybe I'm the one that's going to make this too philosophical. I'm not sure. Not saying that you make other things too philosophical, but you usually pull more in that direction and I pull in a different direction sometimes. But I'm thinking, for example, is there a difference between art and entertainment?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I'd have to think about that. Do you have an opinion?
I'm thinking that for example, art can be a part of entertainment, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. So I'm thinking that the two spheres overlap. I think that there is art that is not entertaining, and I think there's entertainment that's not art. But I do think that there is some entertainment that is a form of art, and there's some art that is a form of entertainment. And even then, how would I distinguish entertainment versus art?
What gives something artistic merit that might be entertaining but not art?
Yeah, and that's what I'm kind of trying to get at. To me,
I can see where you're going with this. I think I agree with you, but continue.
Yeah. So it seems to me that art includes some sort of aesthetic appreciation. That there is... Okay, for example, I'm thinking of, I usually have, in Intro to Philosophy, I'll have students read a number of excerpts, from one of these anthology books. You're familiar with that.
Yeah, I still have all mine.
Well, they're good. They're good books to have. I'm thinking about a particular snippet where Wittgenstein is talking about what is aesthetics. And he says, for example, aesthetics is more than just saying, oh, that sounds good, or I like the way that sounds, or that makes me feel a certain way. Although art can do that, he wanted to say that aesthetics needs to be a little more than that. Now, this is where, again, not everybody agrees. So let's say if we're talking about music, I think, for example, I would consider, say, somebody like Jimi Hendrix to be both an artist and an entertainer. But he's not just going for, people clapping their hands and getting into it or whatever. He really is trying to be innovative. And so, like, to me, the more you understand what he's trying to do, or like if you listen to him, like take an old cover and turn it into like a blues rock variation. Mm-hmm. To me, that kind of creativity that's like a completely different level of appreciation. And I still like the fact that, it evokes certain emotions or feelings or, affects you physiologically in certain ways. And I still like that. And there's some music I listen to that's pretty much all it is. Like, for example, like a lot of dance music. I don't really like club dance music, especially when they'll do the dance mix. They'll take some song that may actually be kind of artistic in its own realm, and then they'll just take it and it just all sounds the same. Boom, 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 boom,
yeah.
boom, boom,
boots
boom,
and cats and boots and cats and boots and cats.
Yeah.
So I actually have this conversation kind of frequently. Most of my friends are musicians,
right?
So we talk about music a lot, and we always talk about this distinction between like, what do we think is good music,
right?
That we like, but then there's this like wider circle within that of like music we like that is not good music. Okay. And I think we're kind of approaching the same distinction of like, well, this is music that I find entertaining and enjoyable, but doesn't have a lot of like depth to it.
Right.
But, right. And then included in that circle is the circle of music I like and find enjoyable and entertaining that is also artistically, valid.
Yeah. So I guess maybe, and this is the thing, I think like, and this is where we come back to commodity for art, or say for music. I think a lot of it has to do with complexity. So, and there are a lot of even popular artists, say singers, musicians that are artists, that they're doing something more than like, again, I think the average person, I don't know, everybody has to be a professional philosopher, but I think like people that have a background in music, okay, you're obviously able to appreciate more what's going on. Like, even if I want to just kind of use paintings or say visual art as an example, I like going up to the Art Institute in Chicago and mm-hmm. just looking at everything. And yet I know that as I'm looking, there's probably more to appreciate to all these different works of art than I'm capable of doing, just because I don't have enough familiarity with technique and say how you get certain paint colors or certain textures or whatever it may be. Somebody who has tried to produce some of these things then can see that.
Yeah, and yet I find the difference between like a musician and a non-musician when it comes to them listening to and appreciating music is a musician can tell you why something is good, and a non-musician doesn't really. Right. Well, I like it, but I don't know why it has this effect on me.
Right. Exactly.
But then,
exactly.
Is it not the case that the employment of like more complexity and better techniques are to the same ends that like less complex music is reaching towards, right? So if the point of a lot of like music theory or musical technique is to evoke a particular feeling in the audience or to convey a certain idea through music. Is that not, where's the dividing line between like, oh, well, this is complex enough to qualify as art? Like that seems like a very permeable barrier.
Oh, yeah. I think that's true. I think a lot of things have some level of artistic value. I've thought about this and somewhat. I'm tempted to say, okay, for example, Jackson Pollock paintings. I mean, Jack the Dripper. Is that really great?
I've never heard that before.
You never heard that before? Yeah, that's what my when I took art appreciation in college, they said that he was nicknamed Jack the Dripper. But I would say this. I tend to favor like defining like an artistic value by the reproducibility of something. The more difficult something is to reproduce, then I think it has higher artistic value because it becomes more unique. Anybody like that puts together like a singing group or a band or whatever, there's a certain uniqueness to it that necessarily can't be reproduced, but some things can be reproduced.
The drips
more
never
easily
fall
than
in the
others.
same place, but anybody can drip with paint.
Well, yeah. I mean, now if he's like, I'm going to create this kind of a pattern, and then
or
go
evoke
ahead and,
some sort of color theory that is intentional.
Yes, right. There's not just
there's
random.
a level that intentionality of the creator matters.
That's true too, because that's very. I would say liken that to like what we call like in epistemology, epistemic luck. It's like, well, somebody guesses right, but they don't know why they're right.
Right, so it doesn't constitute knowledge.
Right. And I would say the same thing's true in terms like of intention. If somebody, and sometimes there are these situations where like somebody's recording in a studio and something comes out a little differently than what you expect. Like there's like a slight crack in the voice or a squeak or something with, the way an attack on the musician is attacking a note on an instrument or something like that, and it comes out a little novel. Well, then, because that happened to me once when our family was making a recording and I was adding like trumpet background parts. Well, then this one part, I was doing this. It was like a novelty type song, and I was using like a Harman wah-wah mute.
Oh yeah, uh-huh.
And this one time I was just going wah 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 wah, in the background because it was kind of like a funny song. Well, then the one time when I went to go wah 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 wah, my timing on my hand was off, and it went wah 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 like that, and I didn't intend for it to come out that way, but the recording technician said, I think you ought to leave it in there because nobody would know it wasn't intentional anyway, and it sounds cool. And well, I can't really take credit for that because I never intended for it to sound that way.
Right.
It's like the person who banks in a foul shot in a basketball game.
So you could say that there's in differentiating just art from entertainment, there's a level at which the like dividing line is how much of like human will is present in the piece.
I think that's certainly part of it. Now that's judging art from the standpoint of its creation. But there again,
there's another way of thinking about art. It was like, does a product become art in the eyes of the beholder? Like if it takes on some sort of artistic meaning to the viewer, is it then art?
It's possible. Sometimes I think look at it this way. a lot of great art ends up getting mimicked, or there are attempts to reproduce it. And that's why I tend to lean in that direction about the reproducibility of something. Let's put it this way. When something really has a lot of special value or meaning, then you have other people are going to naturally try to copy it. They want to produce something that sounds like that. They want to produce something that looks like that. You know, I don't know. It might be saying
so like, one of the reasons I would maybe propose this like art is in the eyes of the beholder sort of approach is that in today's culture, so much important media is tainted by the author of the media, you know, coming out as a terrible person. So, there's this canceling thing going on, which for some people, the argument is, well, if somebody is a bad person, you should no longer support them by enjoying their art.
Yeah. Like Hitler being a painter.
Or, you know, J.K. Rowling being transphobic. If you are supportive of the trans community, you shouldn't read Harry Potter.
Yes.
Now, if you take the approach of, well, the author doesn't matter, it's what it means to the person consuming the art, then you don't have to deal with that. And that's the death of the author approach.
Well, that's true. I mean, it is multifaceted. Let's see. So let me steer us back in our original direction again. Unless you want to go down this path a little more. I kind of took us in this direction.
I think it would be good. Like, so if that's, I think we do need a working definition of like, how do we differentiate between something that belongs in the marketplace as a commodity versus what's a public good, though. I think that's what we're kind of reaching at.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, I don't have problems with things being commodities, but I guess my question is, it seems that throughout history, great art has only really been produced either by somebody who just loves it so much that they do it for its own sake, for their own satisfaction. That is the artist, or it gets commissioned by somebody. Somebody wealthy pays to have art produced.
Yeah, Van Gogh's brother funding his entire life.
Right. And you know, the same thing was true. Even like some of the philosophers we revere, they weren't professional philosophers. They, like Spinoza was a lens maker, and David Hume never got a teaching position. Neither did Schopenhauer. And John Stuart Mill worked for the Geological Survey Office or something like that. Somebody though, like, paintings and, well, it's just like the Sistine Chapel. I mean, would we have anything like the painting of the Sistine Chapel if the church, the Roman Catholic Church hadn't paid for it, to have it done? I don't think so. And I don't think the marketplace is going to produce. I don't think the marketplace is going to produce what most people aren't going to be able to fully appreciate anyway.
Yeah, I don't know if the market can. I don't think the marketplace can afford good art, if that makes sense. The amount of time and preparation and work that goes into art can't be funded.
Oh, it could. Now it could, if there were enough people to really want it. So think of it this way. Let's say, Broadway shows. Here, I think this would be a fairly accessible example. So Broadway shows, if a Broadway show, like if a show is entertaining enough, say like Hamilton or something like that, and it catches on with a big enough audience, like people don't necessarily have to go in person to see it. You can watch a recording of it or something and market it to a whole bunch of people. There are enough people that can access these things now through multimedia that I think you could fund great art if people have the appreciation for it.
Yeah, I don't think it's not possible to fund great art in the marketplace. I think there is definitely art in the marketplace. The question is, can an artist take the risk? And, because if nobody likes your art, even if it is great art, there's like a filter between great art and entertainment that also just happens to be great art. And you have to take a massive leap of faith of like, well, I'm just going to hope that this does well and wins in the marketplace of art in order to fund my life.
Right.
And that, to me, that discourages the creation of truly independent art.
Yeah, I think so. Or at least it does nothing to foster it.
I think that's how we get I think that's how you get bad entertainment, right? Because that's the other side of the circle is, well, this is good and entertainment, even if it doesn't have a lot of artistic merit, but there's also bad entertainment, which is just like corporate nonsense, hotel art, garbage pop songs, stuff like that.
Or music that you hear in the elevator.
Yeah, right. Or, I mean, even a lot of pop music. I think pop gets a bad rap as a genre. I think there's a lot of artistic merit in pop music, but there is definitely what I would call corporate pop, which is just like, this is pop that was written by somebody to just be catchy and just sell a lot of copies.
Well, you see that happen with a lot of musicians, and this applies in other areas too. But I mean, you watch, like, you follow the career of some musician, and they start out with something unique where they get this kind of core almost cult following. And then they have this one breakout hit that catches on with the broader population. And then they're offered the big lucrative contract, but then they basically fall into just like some kind of a formula. And then their music for the next 20 years is pretty much all a variation of the same theme.
Yeah, I think I could name at least 10 examples of that just off the top of my head.
Oh, yeah. Well, that was like one of the things with, okay, so I can think of different ones, like musicians I listen to, say like Diana Krall, I think kind of fell into that. I think Alison Krauss and Union Station kind of went that route a bit. I like the innovation that they had early on, but I know that you can't make a lot of money just being innovative in such a way. Like, yeah, at some point you just got to sell the toe tapping stuff or the tear jerking stuff that really is easy to do. Doesn't take hours and hours and hours in the studio to produce it. I think that was part of the tension in the Beatles.
Yeah.
So I think John Lennon, I think Paul McCartney wanted to have artistry, but he didn't have as much objection of doing the cutesy little song that everybody kind of likes to sing along to. And I don't think he really, but it seems like John Lennon didn't want any part of that after the first couple years. And so everything had to be kind of more unique and more, I don't know what the
esoteric.
Yeah, esoteric. That's a good word. It's
number
like
number nine.
Yeah. Why don't we do it in the road?
Yeah,
That's a really weird album.
I like the weird Beatles stuff, but I think you can see it with the Bee Gees. I mean, early Bee Gees stuff is like pretty creative. It's not just all disco, and then they made it as a disco band, and then it's all disco.
Right.
I would say Chicago's that way. Chicago's early stuff is like all bangers, all good. And then it shifted in like the late 80s, early 90s, and it's just like, ugh, not great. Bare Naked Ladies out of the 90s, their early stuff is just a gold mine of great music. And then into the early 2000s up to now, it's just like pop music garbage.
Well, that was I don't know if I mentioned this to you or not, but I read that was like what led to the formation of the group Megadeth.
Oh yeah,
was the guy who helped like
Metallica
start Metallica,
yeah.
And whenever they had Enter Sandman and became a real big pop hit, then it was like, oh, you sold out, and we're not doing thrash metal anymore. We're just doing this kind of pop hard rock stuff, and he didn't want any part of it. So,
well, I mean, that's a tale as old as time in metal.
Yeah,
metal bands have consistently had their like time in the spotlight for the metal subgenre, and then they tend to hit a point where they sell out and like, oh man, I have a tattoo of this band and I just don't really like it anymore. It's just like that happens a lot.
Well, that's what's interesting. Like, so the counter, like that's why I find now that I'm older and like look at this a little differently. It's interesting to compare those types of groups to, say, like a group like Kiss, who was all about marketing and
corporate music.
Oh, yeah. So it's like they were intentionally just trying to package, pop stuff, whatever everybody was going to like.
They were countercultural in a way that was like just countercultural enough to be marketable, but not offensive to anybody either.
Did you ever see those reality shows that Gene Simmons did on cable TV?
No, I've never seen that.
Oh, well, they had one called Gene Simmons Family Jewels. But before that one, he had like a little one. It was called Gene Simmons School of Rock. And so it was after the Jack Black movie. Well, he did this thing where he had all these kids and he was going to like teach a kid, like some teenager, how to be a rock star. Because Gene Simmons basically said, it's not really about talent. You have to have like a certain level of talent, but then it's all about image and marketing and stuff. And so Gene Simmons like comes out and says like, yeah, I wasn't even really that good of a musician, but it's just
talent
like,
doesn't matter if you want to make it
like,
as a musician.
It's all about persona.
Talent
so like
is cheap.
All these
there's
kids
like a
are
billion
like,
talented people.
So there's all these kids that are like trying out and singing and stuff. And he chooses this one kid who, like, I didn't think he wasn't as good. He wasn't as good as a lot of the other kids, but he liked the kid's attitude because he asked them to come up with their own stage name. And this kid called himself the Emperor. And so Gene Simmons picked him because he chose this persona and had the attitude and everything, So maybe there's something to be said for that. I'm not necessarily tried, but I'll just, again, throw a hint. So back to what we were talking about with politics, and then I'll come right back to the music again. But see, this is the question. So we value democracy, and I do think the average person, it's just like music. I think the average person has enough wits about them that if they wanted to understand paintings and music and other things, it's just like even sports. How many people root for sports teams and they don't even know anything about physical conditioning? It's just like watching these old interviews where people are interviewing like the pro wrestlers like in the 80s. Did you ever see any of those old interviews where basically because the matches were scripted or, semi-scripted, okay, these reporters were going trying to interview these wrestlers and saying, will you admit that it's all fake? Well, it just like shows their ignorance that they don't realize that these folks are.
The point of enjoying wrestling is that it is fake.
Well, it's scripted, but
it's a real stunt show.
Right. It's a stunt show.
That's the point.
Well, yeah. So I'm watching this interview, and it was actually Bill Maher on his, what was his first TV show? Politically Incorrect.
Bill Maher, I'm a Clown.
Politically Incorrect with Bill Maher. And, I mean, he looked pretty young on there, but he's got, Sting and Roddy Piper and Bobby the Brain Heenan. And, I forget who the fourth person was. Some young lady. I couldn't remember who she was.
Was it Triple H's wife?
Roddy Piper. What's that?
Was it Triple H's wife?
I don't know. I mean, this was
I forget her name.
Late 80s, early 90s.
Yeah, I mean,
Roddy Piper
I don't know the timeline that well, but
shows. He says, "Look, I've got a hip replacement. I got a metal hip. This wrist has been broken for like 10 years now, and it's never been reset. They couldn't reset it properly, and so tell me it's fake, you know." And they were getting all. I mean, and it's just like because Bill Maher like had no concept. These folks are still like tremendous athletes. Yeah, I mean, it's, and they even said, yeah, it's sports entertainment, but we're like stunt people. We're doing, you know, all these great leaps. And, you know, when somebody smashes a chair across somebody's back or hits them across the back with a chair, that's real, you know. And like, we know how to hit people without like snapping their necks but every once in a while, somebody messes up and somebody gets seriously injured, you know. And it's really interesting. But back to the point I was making, I got myself down a rabbit hole. But the thing is, I can understand, say, like in art and sports and things like that, if people don't want to know what's going on. And like if somebody wants to watch football, but they don't really know much about football or the techniques of blocking and what kind of physical conditioning goes into it, or like even what the different positions are and what the strategies are and different formations and things like that. If somebody doesn't know that, they can still enjoy football. It's not really going to change anybody's life. But the problem is you have the same kind of approach. People take the same kind of approach to politics and making decisions about communal life and society itself. And people are too lazy to educate themselves about the ins and outs of different issues and follow what politicians are voting for which bills and things like that. And there are people out there willing to even do that research for us now. I mean, there was a day back before the internet when it was really difficult for people to actually try to keep track of all this stuff. You had to hope that one of your newspapers or magazines or somebody was keeping track of it for you. But now there's so much information. To me, it's just inexcusable. If people aren't going to step up and be more informed that they are, and honestly, the way these primaries are going, it doesn't. I'm not impressed at all. I'm not impressed at all by American voters. It's almost like American voters are trying to prove to the world that democracy won't work because most people don't care enough to pay attention. They just like, oh, that sounds good to me. Sounds good to me. And it's very much like what we're talking about with this aesthetic appreciation. They don't want to know what goes on beneath the surface. They don't want to know what dynamics are there and have to analyze it. They just want to like, oh, that sounds good. That sounds good. He's going to do this. He's going to do that. She's going to do that, whatever. And, no, it's kind of frightening.
Well, that's part of the like practical argument that I have for why art should be in some way open to the public and free for all to consume, because I think learning about art and art appreciation in many different mediums, painting, music, whatever it may be, can help us to learn how to reflect as a society on these issues in a healthier way.
Yes. Now let me pose a good question, because I think this discussion, even though technically maybe we do include it in the deprogramming project now, I don't know. It is more lighthearted, to an extent, I guess. Maybe I'm getting too worked up and too serious here, but let me ask you this. Say just by making, let's say if we make museums free to the public, how much will that in and of itself start to generate enough interest that there's going to be more appreciation of art? Or is art appreciation, or say music appreciation, is that something that we have to train? Like we need to expose children to different things when they're younger?
Well, I think it's both. I think I had a music education course in my elementary school. So I had that all the way through my public education years. So that's going away at an increasing rate as funding for public education dies a slow, unhappy death. I think we definitely need to bring that back. But also, I think having free public courses on art appreciation would go a long way to catch those who slipped through the cracks of art appreciation in public education.
Right.
I mean, I think basically the argument I'm making is that this should be considered a crucial point of public education, and that public education should be expanded to ongoing learning, continual education through adulthood.
Yeah,
not compulsory, but in terms of availability.
No, I get that. I just think a lot of it is exposure. And here's the thing. And maybe I'm intentionally thinking about what I want to say this with the arts, because I really do think that this is a pretty good analogy for what goes on, even like in thinking about civics and things like that. I think it's very, very similar. I think some people, for example, people don't care as much, I guess, if your children do or don't like the music that you like. Okay. You're not quite at that stage of life yet, but if you have children, especially as they become teenagers, you wonder if the music that you listen to growing up and the music that you both liked as a teenager and as an adult, if your kids are going to look and say, yeah, that's kind of neat. I mean, it's not really my main thing, but yeah, that's okay. Or they're going to say, oh man, that stuff's really corny, or, oh, who would listen to that? I understand that nobody wants like their tastes or opinions or things like that kind of ridiculed by their children. I don't think there are that many people that are that worried whether their kids like or dislike their music. But when this plays over into other things, like when you're getting into talking about ethics and politics and religion and things like that, I think just exposing a child to something is not necessarily, you can expose somebody to something and that doesn't necessarily force them to like it. They could at least, though, recognize why some people do. So I don't think that like having music appreciation in, say, elementary school or high school, or as a part of liberal arts education in college, I don't think that's necessarily everybody's going to fall in love with classical music or listen to opera or whatever. There may be a few who do, but at least people would see what the artistic merit is in it, even if it's not something that they find entertaining. See, it's more about appreciating the artistic value of something. And some people don't understand how you can appreciate artistic value without necessarily finding it entertaining.
Yeah, I mean, there's, as much as I like, there's like the circle of entertaining music that's not necessarily good art that I like. There's also the opposite circle of this is good art that I don't like, but I appreciate it as art. Right. But like, I'm not going to listen to it on at a party.
but my question would be, would we? I'm skeptical. Let me just say it that way. Let me just come out and say it instead of trying to pose it as a question. I doubt that the average person would learn to appreciate art unless we're just exposed to it and it's explained to us. Then we have at least some possibility. There may be people who, for example, they make some new friends, and their friends have different tastes or preferences or whatever, and so you get exposed to something new, and you may see the merit in it. You could apply this to other things like food, say like different kinds of cultural or ethnic foods. And you could still say, okay, I can see why some people would enjoy this. It's not really my thing, but I get it. I understand why people would enjoy this and whatever. But see, I think we do children a disservice. I think many times as a society and as parents, because we're so afraid that if we expose our children to other ways of thinking or other preferences and tastes, that somehow our children are going to wind up hating everything that we like. And I think a lot of that is an overreaction, and then you stunt your own child's development simply because you're too insecure. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that's well said. And I think this is potentially, I'm being a little bit too philosophical now, but I think the reason that the art exposure and the explanation of like what makes this good art, how does it function, I think that's important, because I think that aesthetic appreciation is the like precursor of ethical thinking and ethical understanding.
Absolutely. I think even as far as people learning what is, say, like a healthy sense and level of tolerance, really has to do with understanding where other people, they get their values and why they value what they do. And especially, we need to at least appreciate the things that have been created by human beings and learn to at least have some awareness of how we get these things. So we don't just devolve into a society that's just like, oh, I like that, I don't like that, but at least have some appreciation for, it's like if somebody takes a couple hours to bake you some kind of special pastry, and then you're like, oh, I don't really like whatever. I mean, it just is just a sense of being ungrateful, or like even
without even trying the pastry.
Right. It's just like it just is like a blatant disregard for the amount of effort and care that other people put into certain things.
Right. So I want to go even further in sort of like my initial opinion here and say,
okay,
now I'm not going to call for like centralized funding of the arts, but I do think that it goes beyond just like, oh, well, here's the art that has been made, it's available to the public. I think the creation of new art can only really be free if it is also free from the pressures of the marketplace.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yes.
I think we have, as a society, and maybe not at like a national scale, but at a communal scale, I think there are a lot of things we could do to sort of figure out how to encourage and produce good new art without having to compete with each other in the marketplace.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And I actually think, Christian churches are set up to do this now. Most Christian churches have thousands, if not millions of dollars invested in what is essentially a venue that they call their sanctuary,
right.
that they use to reproduce what I would call bad art. Every generic evangelical church is just playing Hillsong garbage every Sunday, and they have all these super talented people up there doing this.
Right.
Why not
it's so
give them
it's so formulaic.
And they have all the equipment there to say, all right, you worship team, you're very talented, you're very creative, go make something new and use our facility to do so. And we'll do community art nights. But I see very few churches doing that. And I think there's a myriad of ways that like smaller communities or groups of people could figure out how to do this. I just think that's an obvious one.
Well, here's the question. To what extent? Okay, so I guess okay, so like if we think back in history, whenever churches had like beautiful paintings, like your Catholic churches, a few of your Orthodox churches would have statues. And then you had stained glass windows. Even a lot of Protestant churches had, beautiful stained glass windows.
Well, even if we wanted to talk about music, the Gregorian chants and all the...
Oh, my goodness. On my playlist, I have an eclectic selection of music. I listen to a whole bunch. And I still have, like, even like hymns sung by choirs with pipe organ accompaniment. And I was just, I was listening. It was one of Charles Wesley hymn. It wasn't one of his more familiar ones. But I was just, thinking about the words and the chord progression. Now, he didn't write the music. Okay. So I know somebody else did the music, but I just commented to Amy, my wife. I said, this music is almost infinitely better than the stuff that I hear that's popular amongst Christians today. I just don't understand it. We've kind of flipped around. Let's put it this way. I know people we want to have our own freedom, be able to make our own choices. But at least, let's put it this way, there was a certain benefit where people got elevated by being exposed to things that were higher and more noble. We've kind of given up on that. And now what we do is we kind of go in the opposite direction and go for the lowest common denominator.
Yeah.
Whatever has the most entertainment value.
Maybe this is a bit of a soapbox for me, but modern Christian music is the worst music I've ever heard in my entire life. And a lot of the reason for that is because it is written to be replicatable at local churches. And the reason they do that is because they make money off of selling the rights to churches.
Right. Exactly.
And
exactly.
I mean, if that's not like the most capitalist form of iconoclasm, I don't know what it is.
Yeah, it's like, and the funny thing is, music like that is used by a lot of groups that will fault high liturgy in a worship service, because high liturgy sometimes has the same problem. It's like, okay, this is the formula of how you worship God. Like you do this and then you do this and then you do this and you say this and then this happens and then this happens. And that's worship. There's nothing really unique or irreproducible happening to make that. It's just like a cookie cutter order of worship liturgy.
Well, and yet, more importantly, if we're talking about what worship is, there's nothing authentically expressive about playing somebody else's music in the most cookie cutter way possible.
No, and the answer is not, well, we get rid of anything that's artistic whatsoever and just kind of have a free for all, and everybody just kind of like, we'll just kind of go off the cuff. It's let's put it this way. Let's say even if we want to talk about giving a sermon at church or like a public address, okay? The two extremes, okay? The one is you read some sermon or paraphrase a sermon that was written by somebody else. Everybody gets the same sermon, from the district materials, whatever, and everybody's pretty much saying the same things no matter where you hear it. Okay, it's kind of like the McDonald's approach, okay, where everything's got to be as close as possible. On the other hand, you have people say, no, we don't want that. So we're just going to trust the Holy Spirit. And so it's just like you just completely wing it and nobody even prepares anything. Well, what about the happy medium where somebody puts time and maybe they write a new song. Maybe somebody crafts an original sermon or speech, offers something that's new and fresh. See, we have to start getting back to more of that and appreciating those kinds of efforts, or else we're just basically regurgitating the same stuff over and over again, instead of actually producing something that's going to elevate people in some way. And we just keep appealing to the most basic and base feelings and passions of people instead of trying to have something that has some entertainment value, but also is a little bit loftier and expands our minds in some kind of a positive way.
Yeah, I think just to take this out of the, what is the church sphere? The what is the word? The ecclesiological sphere. I think we need to be doing these efforts across all of society.
Absolutely.
Whether that is, if you're a small business owner, having open mic nights, or if you have the means, do artist in residence programs, or if you're more of like a common folk, there's Patreon, there's direct donations to artists. There's all sorts of things we can do to encourage this. And this is a movement that has been going on for a very long time. I just think that this is an important thing to talk about, especially, and I think it connects well with what we were saying about the economic paradigms and where we're going to talk about that in the future.
Yes, absolutely. That's the thing. Folks, it's true here as it's true in many spheres of life. If we value our freedom, and I think we should value our freedom and be able to enjoy that, but let's not use our freedoms to just simply, in other words, use our freedoms to allow ourselves to be challenged and stretched so that we may continue to grow and have a broader appreciation. That's one thing I have striven for. Strived. Anyway, I've tried to do in my adult life is especially with music. I wasn't always eclectic in the music I listened to. It started out rather narrow, and then over the years, I would just listen to different types of music and just try to understand it, and then start being able to appreciate it. And that's what I've tried to do. I still have my favorites, but I want to be able to at least have some awareness of the kinds of things that other people find enriching and fulfilling, and why. To me, that's just a part of growing as a person. And the more we do that, I think it becomes easier to be able to live side by side with people that we don't share the same preferences, but we understand one another's values and where they come from.
I think if you do that, and I also have grown my appreciation of different music genres. I have quite the eclectic taste. Just ask anybody who's ever listened to my master playlist, because it's all over the place. My wife, if we're ever listening to it in the car, my wife was always like, I wonder what'll come up next. It'll always be so different. But you'll be surprised.
The comment I get is, well, that's quite a transition.
Yeah, I get that too. Or, oh man, audio whiplash, which is the name of my next band, by the way. Don't take that.
Okay.
But you'll be surprised. Like when I entered college as a freshman, I hated metal and screaming in music. Any of that, I was against it. Now it's like a good portion of what I listen to, and part of that was I had friends explain it to me. So.
Mm-hmm. I used to make that joke about AC/DC, you know, how they had to replace Bon Scott as a lead screamer. So anyway, but yeah, it's well, anyway, and I do think some of this, let's put it this way, there's not as much of an obligation for us to learn to appreciate more in terms of like, I mean, it helps like with food and music and other things like that. It does help us to be able to relate to more people. And if you think about that and start thinking about that in terms of what does it mean to be a good citizen and participate in society, both just in our personal lives and politically through our votes and support and things like that. So anyway, we hope you've, was there anything else, any other ribbons we need to tie up here before we
No, I don't think so. I think this can be a shorter episode.
Yeah.
You said
it's actually still best part of an hour. So I think I enjoyed this. I think this is good. And yeah, I mean, the only thing that you could say was like, okay, what are the groups, what are the musicians who never say sold out or tried to be commercial?
I've actually got a longer list of those than I do of groups that have sold out.
Yeah, probably the list would start with all the people that Led Zeppelin ripped off.
Hey, John Bonham's a great drummer.
Well, he is. I really like Led Zeppelin, you know, once they finally got around to crediting their sources, but that was a different day and age, but they got caught on it. But I don't know why they couldn't have just taken credit as just for rearranging, except they didn't want to pay any royalties is the only thing I can think. But they really were innovative in the way they took some of their songs, and like Dazed and Confused. That one really, I really like that song, but nevertheless, yeah, you know, I think, let's just make this into a little lesson, but that's another thing. We can all learn to expand our realm of appreciation of different things, different ideas, different tastes, without giving up ourselves or selling out for popularity, even in our own lives. I mean, a lot of these principles are practical in a lot of different areas of life. Sometimes in life, and any teenagers listening to us, you know, keep this in mind. I mean, you have to you have to give up a little bit of your individuality to be able to relate to other people. Okay. Like in other words, you just can't do everything you feel like doing, whenever you want to. You have to kind of cooperate with the group. And if the group decides, hey, we'd like to go here today or whatever, if that really wasn't your choice, then you kind of go along with it to a point, but don't become so much of a part of a group that you give up your individuality either. Find a nice happy medium of that where you can belong to a group and groups of people, but at the same time be true to yourself and not give up who you are and not sell out just to be popular. Okay. So anyway, as always, reach out to us, send us a little note or whatever, at Happy Cynics at gmail.com. We've enjoyed this, and we hope you have too, and we hope you have a great day and enjoy all the little pleasures of life. We'll see you again very soon.